Welcome to The Kitchen Table, a conversation about faith, music, and culture. Join Shine.fm's ministry director Brian McIntyre Utter and his son Jake around the table for this week's chat.
I was recently on a phone call where we were talking about a group of about 40 larger church pastors who had come together. These are pastors that have over 1,000 people in attendance, and they shared this common concern. And you would think pastors of churches that size, they wouldn't have many things that they can't figure out because they have a lot of resources, they have staff, but their common concern was they're very concerned about evangelism and discipleship going forward in our culture.
Welcome to The Kitchen Table. My name is Jake.
And I'm Brian.
And we're glad to have you for another episode of The Kitchen Table. The reason we started this podcast, if you're new to us here, I am son. He is dad, and I went off to college. Dad has always encouraged me to have faith conversations, and we typically had those over the kitchen table, being the name of the kitchen table. So when I went off to college, Dad wanted to continue that, and we are both media-driven people, and we wanted to do a podcast. So we started this podcast about almost 2 years.
Yeah,
2 years now.
Yeah.
I mean, this summer will be 2 years.
Actually, this summer will be 3 years.
Oh my goodness, that's crazy. Yeah, because I guess I'm finishing my junior year.
Yeah.
So we just really like to have faith conversations over. We don't do it at a kitchen table, unfortunately, but the way the show's set up, we do our faith conversation for about the first 20 to 30 minutes of the show, and then we move into our program or segment called Music Matters. And in that, we just talk about music that is speaking to us. I kind of bring a song of the week. Dad brings a new song, and then a oldie but goldie, because he has always done that in my life. And then we move into our last segment called Culture Shock. And in Culture Shock, we talk about difference makers. We talk about culture shockers, as I like to call them. And they can be average Joe Schmoes, as I like to say, or they can be celebrities like athletes and actresses and actors. And so let's get into our faith topic.
We have a guest today with us. Rick Selk is a friend and the executive director of Youth for Christ Chicago. And it's great to have you here.
Great to be with you.
It's always a pleasure to talk with you. I texted Rick a couple weeks ago. I said, hey, there's this quote that I just read, and I want to do a conversation about this. And it was a quote or a tweet or something I read. It was Shane Claiborne. I don't agree with everything that Shane has put out. He's written some books and different things. In fact, I probably agree with less than what I actually disagree with more. He said this. I'm like, man, we need to have a conversation about this because it struck a chord with me. Says if we lose a generation of young people in the church, it won't be because we didn't entertain them. It'll be because we didn't dare them to do something meaningful with the gospel in light of the world we live in. Thinking of those churches over 1,000, they pull off great services on the weekend. They do it right. And if you want to call it professional, great presentation, if you want to call it entertaining, some people do that. They think, it's just entertainment. And a lot of people go to church on Sunday, those larger churches, because it's great entertainment. And does that send this message to young people today that that's what church is all about? Mr. Wisdom, I've brought you here to the studio since you have your thumb on the pulse of youth, I think, I hope. When you read that statement from Shane, what is your initial reaction to it?
Brian, thanks for having me on this. And this topic is near and dear to my heart, obviously, for decades of work. And our mission at Youth for Christ is tantamount to even what the church is producing or challenging our young people with is what I like to share often in recent years with people, the analogy that let's frame the current youth culture relating to church. And here's one of the, again, storylines, that whatever we have in our minds as the place of the starting point for the average teenager in America is in understanding the gospel and understanding biblical principles, church involvement, wherever we might think that starting line is, you can step back a long way to where their starting line really is.
Yeah.
So in that context, what the church is offering and even challenging young people with the gospel, it's the understanding of the most basic biblical principles that now a generation or even 2 generations removed from a culture in America that was by and large, whether you were ever a choir boy or girl, whether you were ever really serving in the church, you had these basic biblical understandings and foundation. Who are Adam and Eve? What is the crucifixion about? What is Easter about? What are we really celebrating at Christmas and this virgin, immaculate conception and birth? That is a foreign message to more and more of our young people in America today than any of us really want to believe.
Well, I read, and it's probably been 20 years ago, I hate to admit that, but there was something that came out that said we now have a generation who have grown up who don't know the basic stories of Sunday school because they've never been to Sunday school. Because we all know those basic Bible stories from that. And now we have this generation that they're clueless about that kind of thing.
Of course. And so when you look at Shane's quote, and I believe, as you do, that what he's saying is very accurate.
Mm-hmm.
In our mission, the target student for our staff is the unchurched, non-Christian kid from a non-church, non-Christian family. That's a target, a bullseye center for us. These young people that we would take, for example, on spring break trips to Florida, and in various years we would actually offer, not mandate, not a mandatory visit, but we would offer, if we were in Florida over spring break and it was on Sunday morning, we would offer a church option to take students, and we'd have some staff stay back at the camp or the hotels for kids that were absolutely opposed, and we get that. If I could tell you and share with our listeners how many of the young people that we've taken over the years on those trips, these are 14, 15, 16-year-olds, et cetera, that tell us, this is the first time I've been in a church in 10 years, or this is the first time in my life I've ever been inside of a church. And you want to take them to task and you say, wait a minute. So you're telling me you've never in your lifetime, you're 16 years old, you've never been to a church for a wedding, you've never been to a church for a funeral, you've never been inside of a church before, and it's remarkable how many young people would say, I have never, ever before this been in a church for any reason.
That's kind of shocking because I wasn't even thinking about funerals or weddings.
Right.
You would just assume that everyone's been to a church for one of those, but they've never been.
Well, then how do we make that adjustment? How do we position ourselves so we can effectively reach youth like me?
People that are in these arenas are realizing that our abilities or lack thereof to frame a message that's still winsome, that's still appropriate in a post-Christian, postmodern era, that's not dogmatic, is the challenge. So one of the things is we get XYZ young person in the door that has never experienced this, but what are we offering them possibly that would make them want to come back? So, back to Shane's quote, entertainment, they can get anywhere. In fact, if the church is trying to compete on an entertainment level with the world today, I think we lose on most fronts, even the greatest mega churches that have all the human and financial resources. So what is the drawing card of a gospel? And I would say that, the reality of the human void that we all experience, looking for meaning, looking for belonging. Why am I here? What's the meaning of my life? We can provide those answers and do it in a winsome and convincing way.
Some of the research that I've done on generations is the big thing is they want to be connected. That's why they use technology more than anything. And technology allows them to be connected digitally with anyone in the world. But they thrive off of this desire to belong to a community, to be connected with people physically and digitally. They can do that easily, but physically. And I think that's in the last 14 months that we've been living in, where we have had to socially isolate ourselves. We've seen mental illness skyrocket because of isolation. Coming out on the other side of this, it's going to be even more of a desire for them that they're wanting community more than anything. So how do we connect them? How do we bring them in and make them part of this community?
The question the church has always had is, if you can't entertain us, how do you attempt to reach us?
Well, yeah, and I think if you go to the root of adolescence and even at seminary levels, when you study this, what you find is something that's fairly simple. This hasn't probably changed even with generational changes, even with all of our cultural changes. Probably one of the number one objectives of most teenagers, adolescents in America, is understanding who I am, and i.e. this plays out in what is commonly termed as identity formation. This idea of now the experts are saying not only is that an adolescent issue, it is an adolescence issue. In the early adulthood, it's my identity formation. So if you can imagine that on social media, when we can portray who we want ourselves to be, and we can always present our best selves. So I'm forming my identity, at least I'm telling the world who my identity is. So you have that as your root, your platform that you're trying to approach this subject with. The other side of it is, when we look at what's attractional in the world today to teenagers, this is a fascination for me because friends of mine would say that via my job, I'm probably in more Panera Breads, Starbucks, corner bakeries on a given week than a whole lot of people just doing meetings at this third or other place, as they've become known as.
Yeah.
And frankly, when I'm doing appointments in afternoon settings in those type of environments, the teenage population inside of places where coffee's not cheap, it's an expensive stop, but the number of teenagers that I see in places like Panera and Starbucks on afternoon appointments is pretty overwhelming at times. In fact, I've been in places where the management at the place will lament all the teenagers that come in here after school because not all of them are spending money.
Oh, gotcha.
But back to your point of community, this is where they like to hang. Well, let's think about, again, go back 2 or 3 generations and think about what an average youth group room looked like in a church. Mm-hmm. How many ping pong tables, air hockey tables, pool tables, video games, et cetera, can we set up? Now, not that that's not attractional for some students today, because obviously it is.
So growing up in the church, I went to youth group, and one of my favorite things of youth group was small group. Fortunately, being around Olivet Nazarene University, we had youth interns that were our small group leaders, and we each had kind of a room where we were able to have that. And it was typically a room where there were couches, but they were outdated. It was like a really weird vibe. And it was like,
it's basically couches that were donated to you.
Yes. And I think youth groups need to be more intentional with that, because with communication, we want a safe, inviting, open space for people to feel comfortable, especially like people who are bringing friends into their youth group. They want a safe space. And so I think the way youth rooms should look, I went to Valparaiso Church of the Nazarene this past Saturday, and the way their youth room looked, fortunately, they were blessed to be able to take their old sanctuary and make it their youth room. And so they have this really nice stage, but then they have like specific rooms where they have couches and like nice couches and beanbag chairs and all this stuff. And it's just like, sit where you want. We are family here. We're going to sit as a family, because this is a small group is one of the most crucial things. I think that's where the next kind of step of the church needs to go, is small group, because we're called to community. As Christians, God calls us to community and to reach others through community. And I think it's so much easier to bring people into a Christian stand from inside of a home or a living room instead of the church, because some people have just been hurt by the church building, and not the church building, but the people inside of the church. And so it's traumatizing for them to go back into a church building. So get them into a safe space.
The real idea of those conversation pods, places that what does a Starbucks or a Panera really offer? Well, it's kind of a cool, light setting. The colors on the walls are right. The food, the environment's right. The lighting's right. The seating's right. But they're not in there because of pool tables or ping pong tables or air hockey tables. They're in there because they can look eye to eye with their friends and they can just talk about life. Now, I've never been a guy that's seen many Seinfeld episodes ever, but I have a lot of friends that reference those, and they'll say, how did the guy run for years on a television show that obviously the whole shtick is it's about nothing?
Right.
They're getting together in those environments, what they believe is talking about nothing. Our job in leading parachurch ministries and youth groups and churches is to help them get into those environments, but actually help them talk about something and purpose and meaning.
You think it's really the church's opportunity here to take that life conversation moments and take it one step further into the purpose of life, offering those same kinds of situations where you can have conversations that go a little deeper into life.
Even it's the environments that we create. So that, again, the typical youth group room of days gone by was exactly what I described earlier, the games, et cetera, et cetera. Today, the smartest, most, I believe, attractional youth group room setting or parachurch outreach room setting, our Campus Life Center, one that we recently built within the last few years up in the northwest suburbs. It was amazing. You'd bring people in there. It was sort of like they were a little bit shocked because they'd walk in the doors and they were almost looking for, okay, so where are the pool tables? Where are the ping pong tables, et cetera? It was very much structured as a cafe feel, lots of conversational little sitting areas with couches, overstuffed chairs, and just places where kids could hang to do their homework together, create the community, a lot of small group environments. And then our initiatives and our strategies would be, how do we place Christian adults who care in those settings that can be conversational, that can be intentional, but can do it again in a winsome way that's not giving kids all the answers, but creating those environments where they feel safe to really share about what's going on in their lives. And what's amazing today is when you get young people, middle school, high school students in those settings, they are remarkably willing to share. And you need to literally train your leaders to say you can't have shock written all over your face, because these students, when they get in those environments, tend to share in some very transparent and raw ways.
Yeah. Let's look at the second part of that quote from Shane that basically says, we didn't dare them to do something meaningful with the gospel in light of the world we live in. One of the things I've seen as I've and the reason I research generations is because I have, that Gen Z, and then I have the even younger generation. I don't know if they're calling it double A or whatever, but so there are two different generations, two different mindsets with my boys. But one of the things I've seen in my research is that Gen Z, they want to make a difference in the world, and they want to make it now. They don't want to wait until they're 30, 35, whatever. They want to make a difference now, and we see that. So how can we, in light of what Shane says, dare them to do something meaningful with the gospel in the light of the world we live in the culture we're living in today? How can we, as the church, give them one, I don't want to say permission, but give them the freedom? You can make a difference now. What do you want to do?
It's crazy when you think about the idea that the gospel message is clear. Galatians chapter 5, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. And unfortunately, I think one of the weights or one of the struggles that is upon many young people today is everything that's coming at them and what's filling their minds, what's filling their hearts, what's filling their emotions. Just this past Sunday, I was reminded about this because to get young people to do something powerful with the gospel, a lot of young people today are feeling that they're not good enough, they're not clean enough. And I know a couple of weeks ago, you featured as one of your churches of the week, our friends over at First Church in the DeMotte Wheatfield area. Yeah. And my wife and I drop in on that church once in a while. And we happen to drop in on Pastor John's really strong and courageous message this past Sunday. Now, he addressed something from the platform that a whole lot of pastors today probably do not. They gave the adult discretionary warning, etc. And it was a very appropriate message, but it was really tied to the sexual saturation in our culture via media, and especially and specifically pornography.
Yeah.
And so you go back to Shane's quote and you say, well, why haven't we done it? Because we haven't been able to challenge them to do something meaningful with the gospel. And I think a whole lot of young people are just in the miry clay, to use a biblical analogy. They're in the miry clay of my life that I hear about the greatness of Jesus. I have actually been one of the fortunate young people, perhaps, to say that they were in church as a young child and all the way through into adulthood. And you say, but it's hard for me to think about doing something for Jesus because I'm on a porn site 4 nights out of 5. Or it's hard for me to do something for Jesus because at my school, it's very typical to be exchanging pictures on my smartphone.
Yeah.
He drilled down on this and what is really the percentage of young people today that are struggling with this. And Brian, the numbers are not like minuscule at all.
Yeah.
And the numbers are in the upwards of 75+%. And again, that even drifts into male adulthood, and it's a lower number for females, but it's still there. So when you think about some of the carnage that our culture provides and some of the baggage that our young people are carrying, I think that's part of the issue that we're dealing with.
So do we as a church, we continue to disciple them. We get them in, we continue to disciple them. Do we as a church tell them, you don't have to have this all together to still make a difference? You've got stuff in your life. We understand that. God's working on that. The Holy Spirit's working in you, but you can still make a difference. Is that a message we really need to drive home?
Oh, I think more than ever. I really believe that the transparency of the hurts and the pains, even of leadership people in the church, and the realness of our youth leaders today specifically goes so far with young people today. Because again, if I'm sitting here feeling guilty because I'll never measure up, I'm feeling guilty because I know what the recreational drug culture is in my school.
Yeah.
I know how loosely the sexual norms have become. I just know who I am. So even when I understand the gospel, it's an amazing piece because at the end of the day, the blood of Jesus is enough for the most wretched sinner. But I think, again, generationally through the church, that perhaps has not been the message that has been the loudest voice, that there's been a whole lot more about correcting behavior, et cetera.
Right. You know, what we've seen is this trend of authenticity. It's kind of this oxymoron in the fact that many have this persona they live on social media, which is not reality, yet this hunger on the other side of wanting authenticity. So the question I have at that point then, knowing that young people want authenticity, even though they're putting up this facade on social media, are we as the church of the generation older than them, are we ready to be real with them? Like you said, you train your people not to have that moment of shock on their face when they do have that moment of being real. And it seems to me that is the direction that we need to take, that direction towards authenticity and being real, not only allowing them to be real with us, but also us being transparent and real with them, even in the struggles we face as followers of Christ. No one's perfect. We're still trying to figure this out. We're still trying to be like Jesus every day. Are we at that moment? Are we at that moment? Are we ready to finally be real? And is that what will attract them?
I think we're actually beyond that moment. And I think the idea for most people to be honest enough to say, I want the truth. I'm not sure that I can always handle the truth. We have to, as ministers of the gospel, be able to say, there, but for the grace of God go I, and have that compassionate approach. I mean, even in the most recent news cycles that we've been in and all that's happened in our nation, when we watch what some of us celebrate, it's almost like we celebrate when judgment is finally really served. And if you read the gospel message, certainly there's justice. Certainly there's let's look out for the orphan and the widow. Let's look out for the poor and the lonely. Let's look out for the prisoners and the captives. I mean, where is God's heart in all of this, right? But on the other hand, we have to be a people in ministry leadership that say, when we encounter this, even when we encounter this in that young person from a family that we would have never guessed, that's really what's going on behind that beautiful front door, on that beautiful house, with that beautiful yard, with those beautiful cars in the garage and in the driveway, etc. When we come to terms with, hey, what's the song that you're playing so frequently here? Over and over again, the message is, I'm good, I'm fine, it's right, but I'm not.
Yeah.
Because I'm broken.
Yeah.
What's right?
It's Josh Wilson. Okay.
Yeah. I'm okay.
Yeah.
But I'm not, right? And then what's the whole bottom line there? Truth be told, the truth is rarely told. And I think we're in a culture where not only do we need to be telling the truth, but we know who is the truth. The truth ultimately is a person. If you're a believer in the gospel and you're a believer in the biblical message, the truth is a person named Jesus. So this truth setting us free and us being able to say, I'm prepared to accept the truth, even when it might be a bit shocking, even when it might be a bit unnerving. I believe that's where we are in the world today.
Honestly, if we can't get to that point where we can be real with each other, when someone that's young realizes that that's not an option for them and they have this facade out there, I think what we're seeing, if they can't find a community where they can be real, that's when the isolation begins. And that's where the epidemic of loneliness that we have going on in our culture begins. This was even before COVID. I mean, it's just taken it 10 times over with COVID. Now we have that problem where they can't find a community where they can connect with and be real with. They continue to just withdraw within themselves, which causes other issues.
Of course. Again, I think overall, I mean, let's talk about a commentary on what we've created in church culture. We love our local churches. We love churches when they grow and they become mega churches, and we are reaching more people with the gospel. On the other hand, when you talk about the entertainment piece of that, hey, and let's make it so dark in the church that it seems more like a concert or a movie or a presentation than, you know, if you take your Bible to church and it's an old school Bible, there's a lot of churches today that you can't even read the Bible because it's so dark in there, right? Because we've got a performance going on the stage. Now, I'm not, my church leadership friends that do this, I'm sure there's some rationale for why that's happening. But I will say that when we have created a church culture where, why in the world would I want to carry my Bible to church, or why would I even need my Bible? What I need to hear or read, they'll put it on the screen. And by the way, I love that I can walk into my church with a donut in one hand and my coffee in the other, and I can walk in about 10 minutes late, and I can be a little bit who I want to be as long as I want to be there, and not get connected and not be a part of true discipleship. but I get my weekly dose here
Yeah.
in the comfort and convenience of a very nice chair in a very nice building, climate controlled. We have made the Christian experience much less than than what the New Testament version of following Jesus Christ looked like.
Yeah. And yet research shows from that generation that I have read that it's not about the rock concert on Sunday.
Right, exactly.
They want to go to a place where they can experience God.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at it that way, that should be our focus. Are we creating an atmosphere where you can be real, be transparent, be authentic? Yeah, you want your coffee, but where you'll truly experience God. You will experience the Holy Spirit there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they want. They want to connect. They want to be a part of community.
Yeah, and I think, again, the ironies that this generation is the most connected ever in our nation's history, and that it's also the loneliest at once,
Yeah.
is a crazy paradox that we're all pushing up against. How can we be that connected and yet still that lonely? Well, the isolation that a lot of social media has created is a facade in true community.
It's performance.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah, and so I think driving back to what perhaps was the backyard fence, just the old conversations on the backyard fence, and bringing that back into the reality of what was a lot of the part of the upbringing. You know, when I tell my kids who are now 24, 22, and 18, that one of the things we used to do when I was a kid is on Sunday afternoons, my parents would throw us in the car and we would say, "Where are we going?" And they would say, "We're visiting."
Yeah.
And we would say, "What do you mean?" "Well, we're going visiting." And my sister and I would say, "Well, what do you mean? Who are we going to visit?" "Not sure. We're just taking a drive and we're going to go visiting some people and some friends, whoever we feel led to drop in on." And if you said to your kids today, you know, in this fast-paced, wherever we're going, we've got an agenda and we've got a timeline and we've got appointments and we've got schedules to meet. Hey, just get in the car. "Where are we going?" "I'm not sure. We're just going drive. We're going to go visit some people." What would your kids say? What would they respond? You know, everything has to be orchestrated.
Yep.
There has to be an agenda, right? And to say, well, what did we lose in all of this? Well, one of the things that we lost is this idea that, you know, the guest that can come in your home without an appointment, unannounced, knock on your door, "Hey, we were just here to visit," and then you're actually welcomed in and you're not looked at like, "What in the world are you talking about? We've got things going on here," you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a whole different take on where we are as a society. And then the question is, has that made us healthier or not? Because we're reaping the repercussions of some of this overt intentionality, scheduling, et cetera, to what end?
Yeah. That's a whole nother conversation right there.
Yeah.
So, well, hopefully some of this conversation has sparked ideas. That quote we started off with, I'll read it again. If we lose a generation of young people in the church, it won't be because we didn't entertain them. It will be because we didn't dare them to do something meaningful with the gospel in light of the world we live in. We're still trying to figure this out.
We are.
We really are. But conversations, hopefully like this, will begin to open up ideas, words like authentic and real and transparent, community and connection. This is what it's all about. And when it comes down to it, when you look at the ministry of Jesus, those were the same things. Community and connection with people and being real and transparent with people. It hasn't changed a whole lot. It really hasn't when you think about the core.
When you look at the largest demographic of our culture that is unchurched, or call it pre-Christian, think about the lightning rod issues in our society today, the bioethical issues, whether it's dealing with the LGBTQ issues before us, whether it's dealing with social justice, pro-life issues, et cetera, et cetera. If we don't believe in the church that the gospel has answers and applications for all of that, then we've lost.
Yeah.
And so for us to be able to say the gospel should be in the middle of the conversation about sexual orientation and identity. The gospel should be in the middle of these bioethical issues. The gospel should be in the middle, absolutely central to social justice issues.
Yeah.
We just want to thank Rick Selk for joining us today on the kitchen table. Thank you for all of your input and all of this ministry that you do. And that'll wrap up our faith conversation. Now moving into Music Matters.
So in Music Matters, we love music. There's no other way around it. We love music. We love celebrating all kinds of music. We're very eclectic in our styles. So in this segment, we share songs. Each of us take turns sharing a song, something new, perhaps, or something that's speaking to us this week. And then we'll dive back into the vault and do an oldie but goldie towards the end of this segment.
I always think of Back to the Future whenever
do you really?
talk. I don't know why. It's one of my favorite movies. But
okay. Well, my new song this week, several years ago, I was talking to someone within the music industry. They said, hey, there is a new artist who wants to pick your brain about things because he was trying to launch his ministry and he was bilingual. And he'd recorded some stuff in English. He'd recorded some stuff in Spanish, even though the English is his first language. Mm-hmm. And so they said, you've lived in South America. Can you talk to him? And so set up a phone call with this guy. His name was Evan Kraft. I was giving him a little bit of insight of just what I knew about the Christian music industry in Latin America. So I've watched his career from that moment.
That's
and
really cool.
He didn't necessarily do the English track. He totally went the Spanish track and exploded. I mean, he was all over Latin America, recording with all the major Spanish Christian artists. And it was just awesome to see that. And he's still out there doing it. And he's considered one of the top artists now in Spanish Christian music. Well, the cool thing is he's recording in English now, too. And so we have a new song that we just started playing on Shine. And it's Evan Kraft is his name. And he has a new song with Danny Gokey, who's also bilingual. And so most of the song is in English, a couple phrases in Spanish, but it's called Be All Right, Evan Kraft and Danny Gokey.
I was writing this about a family member who was losing everything during the beginning of the pandemic, and I was praying, God, where are you? What are you doing? I love that I can call out to the Lord and share and cast my anxieties upon Him. So I really hope this song would reach you, that it would bring comfort and peace to you, that the Holy Spirit would speak to you through this song. And I hope you remember that with Jesus, everything will be all right.
Y todo va a estar bien. Everything will be all right. The whole world's in His hands. Your whole world's in His hands.
That's cool. I love Danny Gokey, but I might have to check out Evan Kraft a little bit more.
You need to, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I have a recurring band that I just love, Colony House. I've spoken about them many times. They just released a new song. It's called Oh Yeah. So it's like the letter O and then Y-A. Very simple. It's a really fun song. I think it's kind of like, hey, summer's here, and it's not going to be like last summer because we can mask up and still do stuff.
Well, if you go outside, you can take masks off now.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
If you're vaccinated.
If you are vaccinated. But it's just a fun song. I think it's going to be kind of the big summer song for me. So here is Oh Yeah by Colony House.
And of course, Colony House.
Stephen Curtis Chapman Kids.
They're his sons. Yeah, that's who does that band. Okay, we've done our new stuff. Now it's time to go back in time. Open the vault. It's our oldie but goldie. So we're going to go back to 1994.
5 years before I was born.
And to the very first release of a new young artist, just a teenager. I think she was 14 at the time, and her family moved from Australia.
I know who this is.
Who is this?
It's for King and Country's sister.
It is for King and Country's sister.
I forget what her name
Rebecca
is.
St. James.
Rebecca St. James. That's what it is.
This is her very first song. Of course, the family, her father was involved in Christian music industry in Australia, was a concert promoter, and Rebecca was starting to do music. She wanted to do this as a ministry, so they sold everything they had in Australia. If you've not heard the story, they moved the family, which there's a lot of siblings there, to the United States, had next to nothing, and just were blessed by other people. Oh. And Rebecca started recording and touring, and then her little brothers were her roadies, who are now for King and Country, which is crazy.
Yeah.
But they're all involved in the music industry right now and doing ministry. And so this is her very first song. This kind of like launched her career in 1994. It was one of the top songs from that year, and it's called Here I Am.
I don't know a lot of your oldie but goldies, but I know this one is a good song.
Yeah. And it's good to see. She actually, of course, marries, has kids now. She didn't do music for quite a while, and now she's starting to record music again.
She? That's cool. It'd be cool if she did one with her brothers.
I would think that would probably happen.
I feel like that has to happen. That wraps up Music Matters. And now moving into Culture Shock.
So in Culture Shock, we celebrate someone who's making a difference in culture for the kingdom of God. Now, we've had all kinds of people that we've highlighted on Culture Shock,
we have had a
from
lot.
actors and actresses to sports figures, someone who has some sort of celebrity status. Today, it's definitely one of those average
Joe Schmo.
and actually it's a group of people.
Oh, so it's Joe Schmoes.
Exactly. Well, I tell you about Kenneth. Kenneth was homeless, and he decided that he was going to sit outside an Outback Steakhouse. Didn't have anywhere else to go. Sat outside there, and little did he know that was going to change his life. He was sitting outside this Outback Steakhouse, and a woman asked him if he was okay. You know, a lot of times we see homeless people, and we just ignore them.
Yeah.
You know, they're there. We look the other way. This woman went out of her way and said, "Hey, are you okay?" And he was honest with her. He says, "No, I'm not okay at this time." So this woman, out of the kindness of her heart, I don't even have her name, she gave him a $100 gift card to Outback Steakhouse so he could go in and have a warm meal.
Nice.
Well, after that warm meal, Laura, who is a managing partner of this restaurant, spoke with Kenneth and decided he shouldn't have to go without food again. So she gave Kenneth her business card and told him to come back at any time. So Kenneth returned several times to the restaurant, and over 5 months of coming in and getting a free meal every day, Kenneth decided to ask her for a job. And Laura gave Kenneth the job.
That's cool.
So he's now bussing tables at the Outback. However, the story doesn't end there. Like I said, these are average Joe Schmoes that keep adding to this story, right? So you have this initial woman who gave him a $100 gift card. You have Laura, who's now giving him a job. And he still needed a place to live, and he still needed transportation.
Yeah.
So that's when a Facebook group stepped in. There's this Facebook group that did good things for other people. They're basically Culture Shock. So when Laura posted to this group asking if any of them had hotel recommendations, this is what this group did. Instead of just offering recommendations, many of them pitched in to cover the cost of Kenneth reserving a room for an extended stay motel for 6 weeks. They also gifted him more than $2,200 in cash. They bought him a bicycle. They bought him clothes. They bought him kitchen items because this hotel has a little kitchen, of course. And they bought him groceries. So this is literally a group of people coming together and radically changing Kenneth's life.
Wow.
He says Kenneth is thankful that God blessed him with this new beginning. Here's what Kenneth says. I think it's so much of a good blessing, and it's wonderful just to have people these days that'll do things for you. This is a whole new beginning that God has blessed me with. So I'm trying to get on this right good track that he wants me to stay on. So just thinking that one lady doing that difference, making that little step of saying, "Hey, are you okay?"
No.
Just that question, "Are you okay?" And then responding to the need.
Mm-hmm.
And then seeing his life completely turned around because of the investment of other people.
Yeah.
That's how we change culture. That's why it's Culture Shock.
That's a great story. It really takes a community, takes a people group. I know they say that for like little kids and stuff, but I think to make a true difference, it takes a community. Well, that wraps up Culture Shock. And that wraps up this episode of The Kitchen Table. We want to thank our special guest today, Rick Selk from Youth for Christ. And we just want to encourage him as he continues on his ministry there. And if you want to continue in contact with us, you can join our Facebook group on the Shine.fm Facebook group tab. And there we can continue on the conversation of faith. You can share music with us. You can share people you know in your culture that are making a difference and shocking your culture.
But thanks for spending time with us this week. We'll talk to you soon.
Stay salty and lit.
Thanks for listening to The Kitchen Table on the Shine.fm podcast network from Olivet Nazarene University. Be sure to subscribe for more content delivered each week on faith, music, and culture.